Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine reaching for some fresh vegetables at the market, say broccoli or maybe some long beans, thinking you're making a healthy choice.
Right, the usual stuff you pick up.
Exactly. But what if those, vibrant green veggies were actually loaded with dangerously high levels of pesticides? Levels so high, they're actually deemed unsafe to eat.
Yeah, that's pretty alarming.
It really is. And that's exactly the picture painted by recent reports coming out of places like Kathmandu. We're not talking trace amounts here.
No, these tests are showing, wow, sometimes over 90% pesticide residue in common vegetables, found right there in the market.
So this deep dive is all about exploring this critical issue. We've gathered insights from recent news reports, giving us a snapshot from markets and testing labs.
Mm-hmm. Real-time data, basically.
And we've also pulled in findings from a scientific study, one that really digs into the specific types of pesticides and, crucially, their potential health risks.
Right, giving us that deeper context.
Our mission today is pretty clear. Guide you through this information. We want you to understand the scale of the problem, maybe why it's happening.
What the health implications could be?
Yeah, and what's being done about it, if anything. By the end of this, you should have a much clearer picture of this, frankly, vital food safety issue.
Okay, sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's start right there with those alarming findings. What are these tests actually discovering in the vegetables we eat?
Well, the reports show some truly concerning data. Laboratory tests in Kathmandu, for instance, recently found broccoli samples contaminated with over 93% concentration of organophosphate pesticide.
93%. Well,
Yeah. And another test found broccoli, this time from Bhaktapur, with levels over 88%.
and it's not just broccoli, right?
No, definitely not. Long yard beans are showing similar issues. We saw reports of samples from Sarlahi with over 95% residue.
95. That's almost entirely residue.
It is, and from Chitwan over 92%. Even bitter gourd samples from Chitwan registered a, very worrying 75% residue.
What about leafy greens? They often seem susceptible.
They are. Mustard greens are another one frequently highlighted. Samples from various districts showed pesticide residues ranging from 39%, which is already concerning, all the way up to a staggering 82%.
82.
Some samples had levels double the acceptable standards, and one sample in Nepalganj, it had 45% residue, and it was explicitly marked as inedible.
Just inedible.
Yeah. And it seems routine testing often flags high levels in other popular seasonal vegetables, too. Think various leafy greens, tomatoes, cauliflower, gourds, chilies, eggplant. The list goes on.
Okay, so these labs, like the rapid bioassay of pesticide residue analysis units, they must have thresholds, right? How do they decide what's safe?
They do. We learned that below 35% residue is generally considered safe.
Okay.
Between 35 and 45%, well, the vegetable might be okay after a waiting period. Maybe quarantining it for a few days lets the chemicals break down a bit.
Right, a kind of maybe zone.
Exactly. But anything above 45% residue, that's unequivocally considered unsafe. It have to be discarded or destroyed.
And are they actually destroying produce?
Oh, absolutely. The reports mention significant quantities being removed from the supply chain. We're talking hundreds of kilograms of leafy greens, dozens of kilograms of long beans, all because they were just too contaminated.
Wow. Where are these tests happening? Is it just one central market?
The Kalamati fruits and vegetable market in Kathmandu is a major focus, yeah, because it's the largest hub.
Makes sense.
But the problem isn't confined there. Contaminated vegetables are being found in other regions too, and even produce being imported, say from India, is subject to testing at customs points.
And are they finding issues with imported produce as well?
Yes, some of that imported produce is also being destroyed due to high pesticide levels. It's definitely not just a domestic issue.
Okay, so we know there's a problem. We see the specific vegetables, the shocking levels. That leads us straight to the chemicals themselves. What are these pesticides and what do they actually do?
The sources identified the main culprits frequently detected as organophosphates and carbamidase. Those are the two big groups showing up repeatedly.
And these aren't, they sound bad. Are they just generally harmful?
They're described in the reports as highly harmful, yeah. And specifically, they're neurotoxic.
Neurotoxic. Can you break that down? What does that mean in plain language?
It means they directly damage the nervous system. Think about that intricate network of nerves controlling, everything your body does. These chemicals interfere with that crucial system.
Okay, that sounds serious. Did the scientific study you mentioned identify specific ones to worry about?
It did. The study went deeper and found that chlorpyrifos and carbendazim were the pesticides most frequently detected across all the vegetable samples they tested.
Chlorpyrifos and carbendazim. Got it.
But then, when they assessed the potential risk based on the levels found, 3 others were highlighted as posing the highest concern: triacephos, omethoth, and dichlorphos.
Triacephos, ometho, dichlorvos, highest risk.
And interestingly, reports from the Kalamati market specifically mention that organophosphates seem to be more common in the produce tested there compared to carbamates.
Which kind of aligns with the study's findings, maybe.
It seems to, yeah. It's also important to mention something about the testing itself. The sources pointed out limitations.
Limitations. Like what?
Well, while the government apparently allows a huge range of pesticides, like 164 types,
Wow.
the labs, like the one at Kalamati, can currently only test for a limited number. Around 12 types, focusing mainly on these organophosphate and carbamate groups we mentioned.
So they might be missing other harmful pesticides.
It's possible. The good news is there are plans, apparently, to expand testing to cover other groups, like synthetic pyrethroids, maybe even things like DDT in the future.
Okay, that's something. So we see what's being found. We know these chemicals are dangerous. The big question then becomes, why? Why are the levels so high in the first place? What are the root causes?
Yeah, the sources point to a really complex web of reasons. It's not just one single thing. A primary driver seems to be farmers using pesticides quite extensively, partly to protect crops from pests, which is understandable, but also in some cases to speed up growth.
Speed of growth, okay. But using pesticides is common everywhere, isn't it? What's different here?
It seems the timing and the method are key issues. Officials quoted in the reports highlight that farmers are often applying pesticides way too close to harvest time.
Ah, and why would they do that?
Well, the motivation seems to be keeping the produce looking perfect, fresh and pest-free, right up until it hits the market stall. That perfect-looking stuff can fetch a higher price.
Right, but in doing that,
They're ignoring the crucial mandatory waiting periods. Those periods are there specifically to allow the chemicals time to break down to safer levels before consumption.
so the veggies look great, shiny, and perfect, but they're still loaded with active chemicals.
Precisely. And adding to this problem is what seems like a widespread lack of awareness among many farmers. Lack of awareness about proper, safe pesticide application techniques and just how vital observing those waiting periods really is.
So maybe not enough training or information getting through.
That seems to be a factor. Some farmers are also reportedly just upping the dosages beyond recommended levels, trying to knock down pests more effectively, but inadvertently creating a bigger residue problem.
And we also saw a mention of external pressures, right? Like climate change.
Yes, that was cited too. Climate change is apparently contributing to the emergence of new pests and diseases that farmers haven't dealt with before.
Which leads to
More pesticide use, or maybe needing stronger types of pesticides, which in turn increases overall pesticide application and drives up imports.
Speaking of imports, the scale you mentioned earlier, it's quite something.
Yeah, it really is. The sources indicate Nepal imported a significant amount, over 1,100 tons of pesticides in a recent fiscal year. And that figure was actually increased from previous years. It points to a growing reliance on these chemical controls.
Okay, so farmer practices, awareness gaps, market demands. What about regulation? Are the rules being followed? Is anyone checking?
That's another major piece of the puzzle highlighted in the sources. Enforcement of pesticide regulations is described as, frankly, weak,
Weak enforcement, okay.
particularly when it comes to banned substances. Get this. Reports state that a substantial portion of the organophosphate pesticides being found, maybe 50 to 60%, are actually banned in Nepal.
Banned. But they're still being used. How?
Apparently, these banned chemicals are still easily available in agrovet stores, so even though they're illegal, farmers can still buy them and use them.
Wow. That makes effective control almost impossible.
Pretty much. And you also have the factor of expanding commercial vegetable farming, especially focused on seasonal varieties, which seems to be fueling this increased pesticide use overall.
It really is a perfect storm, isn't it? Farmer practices, education gaps, market demands pushing for perfect looks, climate change bringing new pests, easy access to illegal chemicals, and weak oversight.
Yeah, convergence of factors, exactly.
Yes. So what does all of this mean for us, for the people actually eating these vegetables? What are the potential health implications we should be aware of?
This is where the findings become quite sobering, honestly. Consuming vegetables with high levels of these pesticides, especially the organophosphates and carbamates, poses significant health risks, primarily because of that neurotoxic nature we talked about.
Right, the nerve damage, is that an immediate effect?
It can be, yes, but beyond immediate effects, the sources point to serious potential long-term consequences too.
Like what?
Prolonged exposure is linked to an increased risk of really serious conditions. Things like renal failure, kidney problems, heart and lung diseases, various mental health issues, and even certain types of cancer.
That's a heavy list. Are some groups more vulnerable than others?
Absolutely. The sources specifically mention potential adverse effects on pregnant women and potential harm to developing fetuses. It highlights the particular risks for these vulnerable populations.
Okay. Now, the scientific study we looked at, it provided some more context on assessing these risks, right? What were its key takeaways for consumers?
Yeah, it really did. First off, the study confirmed that pesticide residues are just very common in the vegetables tested. For example, they found residues in over 90% of eggplant samples.
90%.
And in literally every single chili and tomato sample they tested, 100% had residues.
Wow. But maybe low levels.
Well, that's the next point. What was particularly concerning is that many samples contained not just one, but multiple different pesticide residues simultaneously.
Multiple pesticides in one bite. You mentioned that earlier.
Yes, the study observed up to 7 different residues in single vegetable samples. This chemical cocktail, as you called it, was found in a significant percentage of eggplants, 56%. Nearly all chili samples, 96%. And again, every single tomato sample tested.
7 different chemicals in one tomato. And how did these levels stack up against, say, international safety standards, like the maximum residue limits, the MRLs, used in the EU?
That's a key question. The study found that a notable percentage of samples exceeded these European limits. For instance, 44%, almost half of the tomato samples,
44%.
and 19%, nearly one-fifth of the chili samples had pesticide levels above the EU MRLs. So it's not just about finding residues, it's finding them at levels considered unsafe internationally.
Okay. The study used some technical terms, hazard quotient and hazard index. Can you simplify what they found there?
Right, HQ and HI. While the calculations are technical, the key finding is the implication, what they mean.
Yeah.
For several specific pesticides, including that high-risk list like chlorpyrifos, triazopos, and others across different vegetables, they found the potential risk, the hazard quotient, significantly exceeded safe thresholds. A value over 1 means potential risk.
And they found values over 1.
Yes. In some cases, like for triazopos and tomatoes, the calculated acute risk, the immediate dietary risk, was found to be many, many times higher than the safe level for both adolescents and adults. It indicates a really high potential dietary risk from that specific chemical in that vegetable.
And because they were finding multiple residues, could they look at the combined cumulative risk?
That's a crucial point, and the study did highlight it. Assessing risk from a mix of chemicals is complex, you know? International standards for combinations often don't exist.
Right.
But the study did find that the cumulative dietary exposure just for organophosphates overall posed a high potential risk. The hazard index, or HI, was high. It suggests that even if individual pesticide levels aren't always alarmingly high on their own,
The combined effect of swallowing multiple different chemicals together could still be seriously concerning.
exactly, the sum might be worse than its parts, potentially.
It really sounds like a significant challenge to get a handle on.
Mm-hmm.
What are the sources saying is actually being done to tackle this problem? Are there monitoring efforts?
There are monitoring efforts in place, yes. The government has labs like the Central Agriculture Laboratory and those RBPR units we mentioned earlier. They're conducting routine testing in various locations across the country.
How many labs are doing this?
Reports mention there are currently 12 such labs operating, with plans for 5 more, so there's an infrastructure for testing.
Is there any effort to move away from relying so heavily on chemical pesticides, maybe alternatives?
Yes, integrated pest management, or IPM, is being promoted as an alternative approach by the government.
IPM. Okay. What's the basic idea there?
The core idea behind IPM is to reduce the overall reliance on chemical pesticides. It's not necessarily about eliminating them entirely, but using them more judiciously as part of a broader strategy.
How does that work in practice? What does IPM look like on a farm?
Well, it involves combining different methods to manage pests. This can include using chemical pesticides, sure, but maybe less frequently or in lower doses. It also incorporates things like biopesticides, the sources mentioned Johulmol as a local example,
Binomal.
and physical methods like using pheromone traps to disrupt pest mating or lure them away. It's a more holistic approach.
And does it work? Does it reduce residues?
Studies mentioned in the sources show that vegetable crops grown using these IPM techniques have considerably lower pesticide residues. So it suggests this approach is effective in reducing the risks.
That's definitely an encouraging sign.
Yeah.
What about things consumers can do themselves once the vegetables are home? Any tips from officials?
Yeah, they did offer some practical advice, based on available knowledge at least. They suggest dipping vegetables in a salt or vinegar solution for about 30 minutes before cooking.
Salt or vinegar soak. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that actually remove much?
It's suggested as a way to potentially reduce surface residues. Also, interestingly, they mentioned refrigerating vegetables for 12 to 14 hours before consumption might help reduce insecticide presence.
Refrigeration. Huh, okay. Useful tips, maybe.
Yeah, things people can try. But it
Yeah.
sounds like they still emphasize tackling the issue at the source, right?
Absolutely. That came through strongly. Educating farmers on safe pesticide use, making sure they apply the correct amount at the right time, and crucially, respecting those mandatory waiting periods before harvest that's repeatedly noted by officials as a critical step.
Addressing the root causes we talked about earlier.
Exactly. So, summing up this deep dive then, it seems pretty clear that the problem of high pesticide residues in common vegetables in Nepal is, well, it's real. It seems quite widespread, and it poses potentially serious health risks.
Mm-hmm. And it's definitely not a simple issue, is it? It's driven by that complex mix of factors we discussed: farming practices, knowledge gaps, weak enforcement, the shocking availability of banned chemicals.
Market pressures for perfect-looking produce, and even the challenges thrown up by climate change, adding new pest pressures.
And the findings from that scientific study really underscore the concern. It's not just about finding high levels of individual pesticides, but the frequent presence of multiple dangerous chemicals all together in one food item.
Yeah, sometimes far exceeding international safety standards and indicating significant potential risk, especially when you consider that cumulative exposure.
Right. Navigating this challenge, it requires balancing a lot of competing needs, doesn't it? You've got food security, making sure there's enough food available,
You've got supporting the livelihoods of the farmers who grow it,
protecting the environment from excessive chemical use.
and maybe most importantly, safeguarding the health of consumers, the people actually eating the food.
It really leaves you considering, what role everyone involved might need to play, from the person planting the seed to the policymakers setting the rules, the researchers studying the impacts.
And finally, to you, the listener, making choices in the market. How do all these parts fit together to find a safer path forward? It's a lot to think about.